Hi, this is Kathy Pershman, retired Chanhassen librarian. Today's talk is going to be about a book that made me cry. This isn't the kind of book that making you cry that you're probably thinking about. It wasn't a romantic story. It wasn't a story that made me particularly happy. It made me cry because it was true and somewhat horrific. Almost in some places a horror story. The book is Ministry for the Future, and the author is Kim Stanley Robinson. Robinson writes science fiction books. He's a legendary science fiction author who is well known for the themes of climate change, politics, technology, and human behaviors. His books are sometimes known as cli-fi, climate fiction. In this book, he imagines eventually a more hopeful world where we have managed to overcome our challenges through geoengineering. But along the way, there's a lot that goes wrong, in addition to many, many deaths, destruction, and economic depression, destructions of large cities. But through geoengineering and things like solar-powered freighters, carbon-neutral transport, going the Arctic route to transport things around the world, many, many people living on airships up in the air, coloring the Arctic Ocean yellow because as the ice melted, it would have contributed too much to the heating of the planet. They managed to get down the carbon in the air eventually. It's quite an interesting book. As I said, it's parts of it are very devastating to read, but I think if you get through it, you'll really be glad you did. Thank you.
Hi, Bridget from Carver County Library's Watertown branch. Want to talk to you about some books that make you want to cry. A good one on the list is James Patterson's Suzanne's Diary for Nicholas. A great love story, very complex, brings you places emotionally that I don't like to go because I don't like to cry, but the read is so good that you have to continue, and it makes you cry. Another book I want to talk about is Dear Edward by Anne Napoletino. I have trouble with her last name, but the book is called Dear Edward, and it was written in 2020 or published in 2020. I listened to this on audiobook. It was just an amazing coming-of-age story, going through a tragic event of a young man, a young boy, and the challenges he has, and the way that people come out to help him in his time of need. It's just an amazing story, but it will make you cry. And I mean many times. So be prepared, but if you like to cry, definitely check it out. Last but not least, another oldie but goodie, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Fantastic story. One of the best books to read if you like to cry. I had my teenage boys listen to this without any explanation as to what this was about. And they came and told me, what a great story. I love this story. What a great friendship. It's an amazing tale. And then once they got to the ending, they were not as happy with me. I have a feeling maybe it made them cry. So anyway, if you like to cry, these 3 books are for you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Marin from Chanhassen Library, and I'm going to talk about 2 books that will make you cry. And they both happen to deal with grief. The first is about the death of a child, and the other is about the death of a parent. But they also have another thing in common. They both end very hopefully, so they are worth reading. I think they both have good messages. The first book is Hamnet, written by Maggie O'Farrell, and it is historical fiction. It's speculative because it is based on the life of William Shakespeare and his marriage to Anne Hathaway. The author had studied Shakespeare and was very curious about the fact that in the records they listed twins, and that were Anne and William Shakespeare's children, and one died at the age of 11, and there's no record of what caused that death. So the author has taken the opportunity to explore more of their marriage, speculate about what the circumstances might have been, and just look at the process of grief and how it was handled. When Anne Hathaway married Shakespeare, she was 26, and Shakespeare was 18. She was 3 months pregnant, and they had their first daughter, Susanna. A couple of years later, Hamnet and Judith are twins that were born. And then at the age of 11, he passed away. So she explores the early years of how they courted, what that was like. And Anne is described as kind of a free spirit. She was an orphan, very independent, and loved nature, was very intuitive, knew medicines through the use of plants and herbs. And she speculates that what took the twin, Hamnet, the boy, was the bubonic plague, which had a resurgence at the time of his death, around 1596. So she goes into what that was like, the disease was like, how it was treated. She's done a lot of research, and just what the daily life was at the time, how people lived. It's very evocative of the time, and how the pace of life, what it might have been like for her to find that her son had fallen ill. First the daughter, she speculates that one twin falls ill, and then the other does, and he succumbs to the bubonic plague. So because she is in tune with nature, and she tries treating the disease herself and doesn't succeed. O'Farrell writes with a lot of authenticity about this, because she herself was very ill as a child. At 8 years old, she nearly died from encephalitis. And she also has a child with a severe life-threatening illness, and has dealt with that several times. And she's actually written a memoir about it called I Am, 17 Brushes with Death. So she does know what it's like to go through a grave illness and ultimately survive. And she puts this into the writing in this story. What's also interesting is that Shakespeare's son name was Hamnet. Often in the church records, it's interchangeable with the name Hamlet, very common during that time. And she speculates what it was like for him to write one of his greatest works, Hamlet, with this using his son's name, who passed away. And so that's an interesting deep dive that she goes into, and it's very slow-paced, very detailed and descriptive. You have to kind of like that, enjoy that style of writing. It's very lyrical, but it's a very worthwhile read. It took me a little bit to get into, but I came to love the characters, and she ends on a very hopeful note, so definitely a worthwhile read. The other book I want to talk about is called Clap When You Land. It's written by Elizabeth Acevedo. It is actually a teen book, but it is so wonderful to read. It also, again, similar in that it is very descriptive. Her verse is wonderful. I'm going to read a little bit of the author's note, because she can explain this a little bit better than I. She is from a Dominican Republic American background, and she writes about, in her author's note, about her first memory flying, and she was going to the Dominican Republic to visit family. And she writes about this, that my favorite moment was when the plane landed and the other passengers clapped. Instinctively, I joined them, Even if the exact performance we were applauding was unclear, it was understood. It was praise for a higher being for allowing us to arrive safely as a reaction to a pilot's performance, applause for ourselves at having finally returned. I didn't know then, and I didn't know now, the exact reason for that spontaneous reaction. But I know I was enamored with the many ways Dominicans celebrate touching down onto our island. And then she further explains that when she was 13 years old, 2 months and 1 day after September 11th, 2001, Flight AA 587 crashed to the ground in Queens, New York. 260 people, plus 5 people on the ground, died, and more than 90% of the passengers were of Dominican descent. Many were returning home. It completely rocked the New York Dominican community. It is the second deadliest aviation crash in United States history. I found that a fascinating fact and is the basis for her book. I did listen to this in the audio version because it won the Teen and Youth Odyssey Award for Excellence in Audiobook Production. It is narrated in part by Elizabeth Acevedo and another narrator. It's beautifully done. It's read in the Dominican accent, which really enhances the story, but it's great to read too. But if you enjoy audiobooks, I highly recommend listening to the audio because I think it really adds to the experience of this story. It follows 2 families, or two main characters, 2 young girls, and it opens with Camino, one of the main characters in the story, who's waiting for her father to arrive from New York in the airport in the Dominican Republic. She's been separated for him for a long while, and she's waiting and waiting and waiting. And I'm going to read a little bit of the verse so you can get a taste of what that is like, because it's so great too. The day. I am beginning to learn that life-altering news is often like a premature birth, ill-timed, catching someone unaware, emotionally unprepared, and often where they shouldn't be. And then a few verses later. An airline employee and 2 security guards approached the crowd like gutter cats used to being kicked, and as soon as the employee utters the word accident, the linoleum opens a gnashing jaw, a bottomless belly. I am swallowed by this shark-toothed truth. Boy, that just captures the moment of finding life-altering news. So I highly recommend the audiobook version of it. It follows the grief of 2 families that don't know about each other and do come to find each other. And ultimately, it's life-changing and very uplifting. So both great books. I hope you give them a look. And thanks for watching.